If you came to one of Oadby's churches on the 11th of January 1905, you would have seen one of these notices affixed to the doors. The notice was to the effect that the LCC was proposing to provide a new public elementary school for about 200 children in Oadby. The old National School, now Carter's Factory in London Road, was in such a poor condition that Mr. Brockington, the then Director of Education, took steps to plan a new school. He bought a site for the future school at a cost of £1,100 and commissioned Joseph Goddard, a local architect, for its design. When the Board of Education gave the approval, Mr. F.J. Bradford, a local builder, was invited to build it. Bradford lost no time in carrying out his contract, and the school was finished by the 25th of January 1909. It was to be known as Sandhurst Street School. Most people in Oadby regard this school as an infant school, but for the first 20 years of its history, it was a junior school. This was because the old board or national school in the centre of the village was so overcrowded that the 7 to 8 year olds had to be accommodated at Sandhurst Street. When the new Gartree School was built on the bypass in 1930, there was plenty of room for the 7 to 8 children there. So then Sandhurst Street had only children below the age of 7 attending, and so became an infant school, a status that it held throughout the rest of its career. These children are dressed as their great-grandparents were probably dressed at the beginning of the century. On Friday afternoon, 29th of January 1909, the school was officially opened. It was to have been opened by the chairman of the LCC, Sir Thomas Cope, who lived in Oadby. But a day or so before the opening, he slipped and fell, and the consequent injury kept him away from the ceremony. So at the last moment, Mr. Dalgleish, a county councillor, was asked to do the honours. Along with Mr. Dalgleish at the ceremony were the chairman of the school, the managers, the Reverend Isaac Rain, the Vicar of Oadby, the Reverend G.A. James, the Baptist minister, Samson Ludlam, Oadby's leading Methodist, A. Turner, a school manager, and the County Director of Education, W.A. Brockington. One of the oldest residents of Oadby is Jim Honeywell, who is 79 years old.
Yes.
Jim, you must have been at the opening ceremony.
Oh yes, I must, yes, yes.
Now, can you remember what type of lessons you had in the school?
Well, as an infant, of course, we had little games and slate pencil making, paper, well, paper models, I'll put it that way. But the actual lessons, it was done mainly on the blackboard.
I presume mainly the 3 R's.
That's right, yes, definitely.
Yes, and I presume you were able to read pretty soon.
Oh yes, yes.
Now, as for the teachers, can you remember the headmistress, Miss Sampson?
Oh yes, very well. Yes.
I believe she used to cycle to school.
Yes, she lived at Wixton.
I see.
Of course, she had to come by our house on the Wixton Road.
Now, I believe there were other teachers. Can you remember the names of any?
Yes, there was definitely a Miss Sissy Ludlam.
Yes.
And she had a teacher, Maggie Ludlam, but my brother I fancy she taught at the other school. I'm not quite sure, but I knew her personally.
Yes, I've been quite a bit into the history of Maggie Ludlam, and unfortunately she died when she was quite early.
Yes,
died quite early on.
Drive,
she lived there, yes. Now, I believe there was a woodwork room, is that so?
Yes.
And is it true there was an allotment too? Did you have to do some gardening?
Yes, school allotment, yes.
Yeah, that's presumably when you were at the school in the centre.
Oh yes, we used to walk up through the village, you see.
Yes, after leaving the infant school, you came back as a senior to the school.
That's it, yes, for woodwork.
Yes. As each person entered the new building that afternoon some 70 years ago, he or she was handed a leaflet describing the main details of the new school. The site cost £1,100 and the school cost £2,300. It was built on the corridor principle. It had a corridor 42 feet long by 12 feet wide, giving access to all 4 classrooms. Each room had accommodation for 50 children. The 2 central rooms were divided by a collapsible partition, thus making one large room. Oh, that's a nice painting. What are you painting, a flower? And what are you doing? You're writing? Yes. And that's nice. The headmistress at the time was Miss Annie Sampson, who had been headmistress of the infant department in the old senior school since November 1898. And she was to continue in that role until 1932. Since then, there have been 7 other headmistresses, the first of whom was Miss Edith Grudgins. She retired in 1942 to be followed by Miss Ellen Narish, who remained until 1952 when she moved to the headship of another county infant school. Her successor was Miss N. Gardner, who continued throughout the 1950s, but resigned in 1959 on her marriage, to be succeeded by Miss Marjorie Kay. Miss Kay was at the school for 4 years and was then seconded to the school's advisory service. As the Education Committee did not appoint an immediate successor, Miss Freeston, the then deputy, was appointed acting head. Eventually, in September 1965, Mrs. Betty Wilkes was appointed to the vacancy, and she stayed at the school for the next 12 years, resigning in April 1977. Her successor was Mrs. Barbara Keith, who stayed for 3 years to be succeeded by the present headmistress, Mrs. Shelton, who has been at the school since January 1970. One feature of the school has been the large number of long-serving teachers. Miss Allen holds the record with 42 years, from 1925 to 1967. Next comes Miss Arnold with 38 years, from 1919 to 1957. The present staff consists of Mrs. Fairbrother, who came in 1966, Mrs. Rose, who came in 1975, and Mrs. Davis, and the headmistress, Mrs. Megan Shelton. Good afternoon, Mrs. Shelton.
Good afternoon, Mr. Elliott.
What are your plans to mark the closing of the school, please?
Well, one of the plans we have is that the children shall do a closing concert for the parents and friends. And we hope that this concert will show the happy atmosphere that's always been part of Sandhurst Street School. And then in May, at the beginning of May, We're opening the school for a week, and we hope that just anybody who has had any connections at all with Sandhurst Street will just come along and see the display of old photographs, etc.
Has there been a good response to these invitations so far?
Well, it's a little early to know. There's been an awful lot of interest shown in the history of the school, and the children at the moment are doing a lot of work based on the history of the school, and are going to have a display of this work.
May I ask then, will it be a sad day for you when the school is closed?
Of course it will. We can't work in a school such as Sandhurst Street and close its door without feeling very sad.
Well, I'm certain we look forward to the amalgamated school.
Thank you.
Some 4,500 children have been taught at the school in its 70 years of existence. When the school started in 1909, 147 were present, and the highest number of children in the school was in the summer term of 1958, when some 330 children were there. In fact, the playground was so full that many accidents occurred with children bumping into one another. The opening of Lawn School in 1960 relieved the pressure on accommodation for a while, but in the 1960s numbers rapidly rose again, and in the summer term of 1965, 320 children were present. Hill Infant School led to a drop in numbers at Sandhurst Street, and the 1970s saw a drop of 50% in admissions, due to the fact that the school's catchment area lies within old established housing estates with few young couples. Watch you.
Not bad. Yeah, they're in bed. Sleeping? No, she's not sleeping. What's she doing? Yeah. What's she doing? No! She's not naughty, no. Get up. That's right, Crystal.
Over the past few years, the school has seen two important developments. In 1971, a partial hearing unit for hearing impaired children was set up.
Look at this one. What's he doing now? What? Do you have a wash in the morning? Do you have a wash in the morning when you get... No! Do you come to school dirty? No, what about you? Do you have a wash? A bath. You have a bath, do you? No. What about you? Stuart, do you have a wash? No. No? Do you have a wash? Do you get up in the morning and go and have a wash in the bathroom? You do? I do too. I go and have a wash in the morning and I brush my teeth. Do you brush your teeth? Yeah. Do you brush your teeth? In the morning before you come to school?
This was the type of equipment the unit first used. Now it is much smaller and most of the time unseen.
So do you walk to school? I don't walk. Do you walk to school? I'm going to call taxi. You go in a taxi. You come in a taxi. What about you? You come to school in a taxi. What about you? Do you come to school in a car? Yeah, what about James? Do you come to school in a car? In a brown car. Oh, that's nice.
In 1976, a nursery class for the under fives was also established. Both these, however, have now been transferred to another school. For well over 70 years, Sandhurst Street School has provided a large number of Oadby children with the preliminary stage of their education. For over 50 years, it was the only infant school in Oadby. And when it closes this year, 1982, on amalgamation with Langmoor School, the most important school ever established in the village will disappear from the scene in the knowledge that it has provided a first-class basic education for many years for the young children of Oadby.